Walked into a dental hospital, screaming I had sore teeth, with a wham bar stuck to my forehead smoking a clove leaf, spitting rotten molars at a bloody sink. "You're hurting me!" And stopped trying to light a cigarette during surgery. Since the youngest age, I was always threatening to run away, but social mobility isn't what they say. Stuck at a red light in my tricycle thinking, fuck them. Well, a bunch of West Enders whizzed past me in the bus lane. How come it's bright in this posh park, but in Pollock it's dark? Probably because the sun isn't shining at everybody's arse. Vegan liberals lecture me to buy local while they're sneering at the Glasgow dialect and my vocals. My woman's asking me, do you wish I looked more like her? Couldn't tell you, I haven't seen her from the front. Apart from that, nothing's going on here locally except on off sales, masquerading as a grocery. All the local shops are shutting since the new Tesco's getting built. Thought I'd check it out, went in sceptical. Had to walk 20 miles just to get some bread and milk. Then got diverted at the checkout by a clothing section. Ended up flipping out, bought some pens, Pepsi, Lilt, a Craftmatic adjustable bed, a lamp, a feathered quilt, a pair of stilettos, salt and pepper, a kilt, a pair of stilts. First person to mention my free will is getting kilt. Luckily, there's a pretty woman on the end of the till offering me instant loans to help me with my credit bills. That's twisted. I warned her I was ham-fisted, but she says I'm eligible despite the fact I'm blacklisted. She says if I just drop my attitude and lighten up, I could get a proper job just like her. She says I ought to take the time to think about the things worth fighting for. I dropped my shopping bags and started fighting her. How come the answer to every question is get a job? In this building site you call society, I function as a world-class wrecking ball. Bravado helps me hide the fact that I feel less than all the ineffectual dross peddled by these intellectual snobs. Fuck your metaphors. Shut the door in my face. You got a firework for your letterbox. So much as step on my lawn. The next middle class C word that tells me to calm down is getting letter bombed. What do you mean this verse is long and that you need a choral section every 12th of the song to stop you from heading off? I wrote this very song perched on the edge of thought watching a desert form, and your only comment is the swearing's raw or the fact I'm mispronouncing Renaissance while I look across the river at you sipping your Pims, wishing I could get hooked on yoga, swimming in gyms as akin to chicken dippers, Lidl's crisps and 70 million minute Sims. Bingo wings over Scotland. This is a little grim, cloaking all my illicit sins in an insignificant rhythmic din. No bad for a kid that used to live in a bin. In truth, I'm sitting here on Twitter in my pants with 7 chins. Thank you. Okay, this chapter is called On the Road. The said land should remain forever as open spaces of woodland for the enhancement of the beauty of the neighbourhood and so far as possible for the benefit of the citizens of Glasgow. Those were the words of Sir John Maxwell as he bequeathed his estate, known as Pollock Park, to the trust of the city in 1939. However, in 1974, the National Trust for Scotland, entrusted with the land, decided to relax the conditions of the previous agreement concerning the park so that a motorway could be built through it. Activist and academic Paul Routledge, hope I've pronounced that right, or Routledge, in his paper The Imagineering of Resistance, Pollock Free State and the Practice of Postmodern Politics. This was a time before postmodern was a contentious term. Outlines the germinal events that culminated in the campaign to oppose the road. Concerted protests against the M77 motorway began in 1978 and involved Corkerhill Community Council and other concerned community groups. In 1988, a public inquiry into the motorway lasted for 3 months and included an array of submissions against the M77. This included opposition from Glasgow District Council, local communities who would be affected by the road, the various community organisations, including Glasgow for People. However, Despite popular resistance to the motorway, preliminary construction commenced in 1992. A swathe was cut through the western side of Pollock Estate and preliminary foundations of the road laid. Despite local people mobilising to make their voices heard over a period of nearly 30 years, they were effectively ignored. A dizzying array of justifications were given. The motorway would assist economic development, save travelling time for road users, improve the reliability of public transport, as well as enhance environmental conditions and reduce road accidents. Opponents of the road disputed these claims and set forth their own case that the M77 would increase noise and air pollution, cause damage to the woodland and wildlife in Pollock Estate, as well as substantially increase traffic. They argued that the resources used to construct the M77 would be better directed to upgrading existing transport facilities, and that the motorway would benefit car users from affluent areas as opposed to the local communities where ownership and use of cars was low. In addition, the construction of the road would sever the access of these local communities to the Pollock Estate, a safe recreational area for children, and place a loud polluting motorway close to primary and secondary schools. Politically, the construction of the motorway would entail the commercial development of a green belt space and the subsequent restriction of public access to the land. In response, a band of environmentalists calling themselves the Pollock Free State set up camp in Pollock Country Park, which they claimed was the property of the people. Led by craftsman and environmentalist Colin MacLeod, who began a treetop protest against the motorway in the early 90s, the Pollock Free State quickly became a beacon of resistance, community empowerment and democracy. Its aim was not only to block the unwanted road, but also to raise the democratic issue of the rights of local people to have a say over how public space is used and developed. It was part of a bigger No M77 protest involving many groups at the time, including Scottish Militant Labour, Earth First and Glasgow for People. The campsite was a microcosm of what people united by shared purpose could achieve with very little resources. MacLeod, a local resident who established a permanent camp in the path of the proposed road after spending 9 days in a tree to prevent it being cut down, came not only to lead the resistance, but to personify its spirit, bringing purpose, connectedness and meaning into a community torn apart by poverty and political apathy. The camp was not only a visible symbol of resistance that forced people to question the legitimacy of the power of local planners and officials, but more importantly, it became a counter-cultural lifestyle through which local people, previously blighted by low self-esteem, idleness and addiction, were upskilled and rehabilitated. But the camp, which fluctuated in membership and comprised people of all social backgrounds, was not without its problems. As well as locals who got involved out of a desire to influence local issues, activists and academics from outside the community flocked to the camp with broader environmental and economic concerns, and this created friction. Locals often felt that the academics and students were parachuting in and taking over, ignoring or minimising their concerns and pushing their own middle-class agenda of environmentalism. There were also problems with drinking and drug use in the camp, and eventually alcohol and drugs were banned. In order to mitigate some of the tension between the competing interests, strict rules around non-judgmental inclusivity were established. MacLeod's formidable skill as a master craftsman was eclipsed only by his natural way with people. He was intuitive always in how to maximise an individual's potential for the benefit of the community. He was respected by everyone and therefore able to mediate between various factions to bring about understanding. However, the Pollock Free State was only one of a number of small but increasingly effective movements operating in the area, much to the frustration of political parties and big business. A trope of young socialists who would later form the SSP had become engaged by the anti-poll tax movement that preceded the Pollock Free State. This was a young, vibrant and mischievous constellation of activists and community leaders. As a result, the community began to empower itself, and people previously apathetic to politics developed new instincts which they began to trust. Self-doubt, after all, is what held so many back. The belief that there's no point in trying because no one will listen was slowly being eroded to make way for a new community confidence. The socialist activists successfully mobilised sections of the local population in service of a number of campaigns against a slew of government policies, including the closure of community centres and schools, as well as warrant sales, the practice of government heavies being dispatched to seize household possessions for non-payment of tax. These disparate movements, like the Pollock Free State and what later became the Scottish Socialist Party, coalesced culturally as a renewal of community spirit that developed into a bit of a swagger. I recall a public meeting in the city chambers where a politician was so scared of the local people that he had to doodle meaningless shapes on a piece of paper to draw attention away from the fact he was visibly shaking. Rather than lie down to the authorities, locals were occupying public land and community centres, opposing school closures. One school marked for demolition was my own, as well as another school just 3 miles away. 3 secondary schools within a 2-mile radius were to be bulldozed. Empowered by the mischief making in the area, teachers, staff and pupils engaged in the consultation process argued that both schools simply needed upgrading and that closure would be a massive blow to the area. They claimed the closures would effectively lead to kids being crammed into much smaller buildings outside of their own communities. As well as my school, the main school in the neighbouring scheme, Penlee, was also to be closed, but not before the two were to be merged. The proposals, which would involve pupils being taxied between schools at intervals to attend classes being held 3 miles down the road, were so potentially disruptive to education that it was laughable. Education was challenging enough without this level of upheaval. Local people and staff confidently opposed the proposals and engaged with the consultation process, certain they would force concessions from the local authority. Before I continue, I meant to say at the beginning, if anyone at any point feels an impulse to interject or suggest an idea or challenge something that's being said, please just make it aware and I'll happily yield so you can say your piece and then I'll continue reading. The wider context here was that activists had been slowly wresting responsibilities from the local authorities and assuming control of the levers of power, either democratically or otherwise, through elections or occupations. Not only were they creating a new level of political consciousness in Pollock, which inspired young and old alike, but they were also running a programme of summer activities, including live music events featuring local artists and football tournaments that brought young people together across territorial divides. Suddenly, it seemed there were lots of positive things going on in Pollock, and young people in communities that had been abandoned by successive governments were beginning to re-engage. The quality of life rose substantially, not because there was more money, there wasn't, but because people were beginning to take responsibility for their own community. In this shared purpose, our lives gained new meaning and our quality of life improved, even though our material circumstances remained the same. But despite more than 3 decades of concerted pushback, the M77 went ahead nonetheless, setting these opposing forces on a collision course. In one corner, you had the full might of the state at local and national level, backed by big business. In the other, an unlikely band of vegetarians, environmentalists, socialists, anarchists, and recovering alcoholics and addicts. The imminent showdown was seen by many as a battle for the soul of the community. "It's a message, man," said Colin MacLeod, "to the community around here. We know we're being watched by people, so we want to try and get their attention, let them know what's happening here and what we're trying to protect." The following text is a personal journal entry the night before the diggers arrived, and the journal entries from the academic who wrote the paper. People adorned with dreadlocks, shaved heads and Mohican cut, rubbed shoulders, with people wearing kilts, tie-dye cloths, and ethnic wear from various corners of the globe, including India, Nepal, Guatemala. A group of musicians strike up some impromptu Celtic folk music. An air of expectancy hangs amid the wood smoke and the winter wind. The 4 cars that are arriving at the Free State are to be buried, engine down, in the M77 roadbed, alongside the 5 that have already been buried. Once buried, the cars will be set alight, burned as totems of resistance, and on their charred skeletons, anti-motorway slogans painted. Amid the sounds of car horns, whistles, and cheers from the assembled crowd, the cars arrive. The cars line up beside a tree which flies the line rampant. As the crowd proceeds to march towards the burial site, a band strikes up a cacophony of bagpipes, horns, drums, whistles, and shouts. We march up to the roadbed, and one by one, the cars are manoeuvred into the tombs that have been dug for them, engine down, and with earth and stones packed around them, the cars are buried vertically in the roadbed. A great cheer rises from the crowd as one teenager from the nearby Pollock housing estate hurls a stone through the driver's window, shattering the glass. A resident of the Free State swings a sledgehammer and dispenses with the windscreen. Another cheer rises from the crowd. We are a rhythmic crowd, moving to the visceral beat of the drum. We revel in the burial of the car, encoded as it is with our resistance to the environmental consequences of excessive car use and the construction of the M77 motorway. Once the cars are buried, petrol is poured over them and they are set alight. Voices of celebration fill the air, accented with Glaswegian, London, English, Australian, Swedish, American. People dance in the firelight, their shadows casting arabesques of celebration upon the road. We dance fire, we become fire, our movements are those of flames. A steady procession of diggers, steamrollers and tractors approached the Pollock Free State on the day construction on the Pollock junction of the M77 was to commence, to find burnt out cars buried in their path like gravestones. This was not only powerful symbolism, but a very stark warning that they wouldn't be going down without a fight. The authorities had anticipated this resistance and came team-handed with police as well as corporate security. As word spread that the confrontation had commenced, locals who were activised by the protest and were now playing a role in their community hurried to the camp to lend whatever hand they could. But by the afternoon, corporate muscle had literally dragged the people of Pollock from their own land. Many of them were thrown in the back of police vans and taken to cells. These upstarts were not to be tolerated. The totality of their lives, their experiences, and everything that had led them to this point where they were prepared to stand and fight for what they believed was regarded as no more than a vulgar impediment to the progress of the many. The many, of course, being the people who still voted for mainstream parties, lived in the suburbs and disliked long traffic queues and back roads on their daily commute. That day, the Pollock Free State was defeated, not by a sworn enemy, but by people claiming to be acting in their best interests. Whether it was the road, the closure of community centres, schools or other services, the local authorities, while making noises to the contrary, had deliberately ignored their wishes at every possible opportunity because they thought they knew better. And the tension between the concerns of local people and the aspirations of the middle class, there would only ever be one winner. Within 10 years, the socialist movement in Scotland, launched from Pollock, had collapsed. A slew of community centres were closed, demolished, or mysteriously caught fire. All 3 local schools, Bellarmine, Penlee and Crookston Castle, were shut down, but not before the final humiliation of my old school being renamed Penlee Annex, a decision so needlessly insensitive we assumed it was made out of spite. It seemed that our culture was not worth preserving, or worse, that our culture was, in fact, an absence of culture. Our ideas about how to run the area, or even what things should be called, were regarded as well-meaning but misguided. Political participation was not about the community making its voice heard, but rather it was about corralling the herd to a predetermined destination decided behind closed doors. The only thing left to be purged was the Pollock Centre, which, as Colin MacLeod and others correctly predicted, became a nebula of aggressive commercialisation from which profit would be extracted from the community in return for low wages and poor working conditions. We soon learned that the Pollock Centre was to be shut down completely as new proposals emerged to create a brand new American-style mall filled with high-end clothing and jewellery stores, restaurants and coffee shops. Local people were seduced by the notion that Pollock would become associated with something shiny, upmarket and respectable. For so long, Pollock had been a byword for social deprivation. Perhaps this new multi-million-pound complex, the size of a small town, which was to be built slap bang on the junction of the new motorway where one of the schools used to be, would cultivate a new image of Pollock in the public mind. Pollock, thanks to this new state-of-the-art centrepiece, would once again be regarded as a clean, safe, forward-thinking area with limitless potential that had put its gritty past behind it. People might stay for a while rather than nervously passing through. People would visit and not be ashamed to say they'd been there. But as it turned out, the new centre would be named Silverburn, perhaps a tongue-in-cheek reference to the shopping trolleys that used to line the banks of the river. Silverburn, a fictional consumer village superimposed on our now deformed landscape, would serve the shopping needs of people from the suburbs with disposable incomes who could now visit our scheme without ever knowing or having to say they were in Pollock. Gentrification is cool when you're watching from a safe distance, but when it's your cultural history that is being dismantled, it leaves a sour taste in the mouth. This new consumer cathedral, where many local people would go to earn and spend their money, would soon become the talk of the town in a way Pollock could only have dreamed. Within a few years, a multi-screen cinema complex and more parking space was added. Silverburn became Pollock's crowning achievement. Too bad then that Pollock, and by extension its people, were edited out of the success story. The political polarity of the area was completely reversed within 10 years, and where once locals had organised to oppose the road on which Silverburn would later be built, they were now circulating petitions demanding a McDonald's restaurant. The only trace of our local cultural heritage can be found in a small photographic exhibition about the Pollock Centre on the wall outside the toilets, there is no mention of Colin MacLeod.